There's been a setback in the fight against the ISIS terrorist group. Just a short time ago, ISIS fighters raised their flag, I should say, on the eastern side of Kobani, where ISIS has been fighting Kurdish forces for control of that Syrian border town. On Friday, the terrorist group executed British aid worker Alan Henning. The video ended with a threat to kill another hostage, American Peter Kasich. Kasich, a former soldier turned aid worker who had converted to Islam. I'm joined now by NBC foreign correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin and documentary filmmaker Matthew Van Dyke, who's been on the ground in Syria. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you both. And Ayman, I want to start with you. This morning's developments. How significant is it that ISIS has gained control of this town near the Turkish border?
Well, Jose, we are getting the initial reports that they've taken over the eastern part of the town, not yet entirely the complete town, but no doubt about it, this is a very symbolic development and a strategic one because it's right up on the Turkish border, so it sends an important message both to the Turkish authorities, but more importantly, it sends an important message to the United States and its allies who have been bombarding ISIS from the air above for the past several weeks. This is a sign that perhaps ISIS has not been degraded as much as we've been told so by some of the coalition countries involved in this air fight. So I think it's a symbolic development that ISIS is still capable of overtaking towns, and more importantly, it's a strategic one because it is right on the border with Turkey.
And Ayman, Vice President Joe Biden apologized on Saturday for comments he made this week implying that Turkey and other U.S. allies had helped Islamic extremists in Syria in the past, and that may not have been diplomatically correct, but was it a case of a politician saying the truth?
Well, I think in this case, there's a little bit of truth, and not necessarily that they fueled the rise of extremism. I think you have to put it in the proper context. Several years ago, Turkey was certainly involved in trying to prop up groups that wanted to fight the Syrian regime. There's no doubt about it that among those groups, there were definitely some extremists, some bad apples who ultimately became the precursor groups to ISIS, including Al-Qaeda and others. So there's no doubt that the rise of these groups help pave the way for ISIS. So I think that's perhaps what the vice president was trying to allude to. But to say a country like the United Arab Emirates, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think, in fact, the vice president probably misspoke in trying to single out that country. That country has been very clear from the early on that it did not support any extremists and certainly was not in support of some of the groups that were receiving some of those indirect funds from their neighboring countries.
Yeah, maybe Qatar is another thing altogether.
Exactly.
But Matthew, once again, we saw the brutality of ISIS who beheaded humanitarian worker Alan Henning. Tell me, well, first of all, your reaction, especially given your relationship with two other murdered hostages, Steven Sotloff and James Foley.
You know, the Henning case really highlights the hypocrisy of ISIS. ISIS tried this man in one of its own courts and found him innocent of spying. There was actually fairly reasonable hope that Henning would actually be released. Muslim leaders in the UK had signed a petition calling for his release, and there's really no justification, even in the minds, I would think, of many ISIS members for what they've done here.
You know, and then now they're threatening to kill former Army Ranger Peter Kasich, who traveled to Syria. He actually converted to Islam. His parents made a video plea to ISIS to spare his life. Is there any reasoning with this group of terrorists?
Absolutely not. Every attempt was made, especially in Henning's case. And Henning and Kasich both traveled to Syria to do humanitarian work to help the Syrian people. No other reason, no other cause. They both gave selflessly of themselves and are paying a tremendous price for it.
And Matthew, when you see this advance towards the Turkish border from ISIS, how do you think of what so far the campaign the United States and its allies have been carrying out? Has it, do you think, made an impact?
I'm really shocked at how limited the campaign has been and that Kobani was allowed to fall. People in Kobani have been fighting for their lives against the advance of ISIS. ISIS advanced across an open plain and yet was still allowed to enter Kobani. It's astonishing. It's just astonishing that the administration has not stepped up this campaign by now.
Matthew Van Dyke, thank you so much. And Ayman, stay with me because I want to talk about a key component in the fight against ISIS, and that's cutting off the cash flow that fuels their brutal operation. Ayman, you're following the ISIS money trail in the second part of your series, special series, How We Got Here. And tell me a little bit about it.
Jose, well, you know, with fighters, weapons, media outlets, and vehicles, ISIS is running up a pretty big spending tab. Some say as much as $1 million a day. But the group is also making money. In fact, U.S. intelligence and some experts estimate that ISIS is earning between $2 to $3 million a day. But how? That's what we're trying to answer. ISIS gets its money from really three main sources: black market oil, kidnappings and ransoms, and from wealthy supporters from Gulf states. Now, if you take a look at this, this is a map of Iraq and Syria. After overrunning oil fields in Syria and Iraq this summer, ISIS took control of oil wells and refineries, and it began selling that oil on the black market in areas under its control and along the Turkish-Syria border right there. It's perhaps one of the reasons why the U.S. and its Arab allies decided to go after those oil refineries and those oil wells by striking them. It sells that oil for much cheaper prices rather than what they are selling on the international market. And as a result of that, they are able to take in about $2 million a day. And as we were saying, that's perhaps why the United States felt compelled to try to cut that source of funding. Now, in addition to that, ISIS has been making money through kidnappings and ransoms. For a while, ISIS made that money by kidnapping individuals and then ultimately securing their ransoms. Now, a short while ago, the Turkish government secured the release of more than 40 of its diplomats held by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. It's not clear what Turkey gave up in exchange for that hostage, for those hostages rather, or if it even paid a ransom, but it does give you an indication of these types of transactions. Early on, some of the countries in the Arabian Gulf funded extremist groups to help topple the Syrian regime. Now, that is obviously according to the United States and a lot of others who have been monitoring cash flow from the region into the Syrian conflict. Now, it is also believed that some of that funds made its way into groups that ultimately became the precursor and supporters of groups like ISIS. But another major source of revenue from the group came from what U.S. officials have called as angel investors. These are wealthy individuals who have, believed to have been supporters of ISIS, at least in its early stages, by wiring transfers from Kuwait and Qatar and other countries into Syria. Now, obviously, the governments of these countries, we have to emphasize, say that is not accurate. And more importantly, they say they're cracking down on individuals who may be sending money to ISIS, but the U.S. wants these countries to do more to curb that cash flow. In the meantime, though, ISIS remains one of the biggest and best funded terror groups we have ever seen. And while, trying to cut off their funds has been a challenge, it remains a central component in the overall strategy to defeat the terrorist group. Jose.
Ayman, thank you so very much. Fascinating look into this very dark world. And Ayman will be answering your questions about the ISIS money trail on Twitter today in a live chat at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can tweet your questions to @AymanM with the hashtag MSNBC chat. NBC's Ayman Mohyeldin.